The plane hadn't even taken off yet. A storm was already forming, and at its center was a name: Naomi Carter. Aurora Air Flight 731 sat quietly on the runway under the amber light of JFK's sunset, its metallic body reflecting the golden hue of power and pride. Inside the first-class cabin, the dark Italian leather seats carried the scent of wealth and authority. Half-finished glasses of champagne sparkled softly beneath the warm lights. Everything was perfect, except for one thing. The woman sitting in seat 1A didn't look like the kind of person who usually sat there. Naomi Carter, 42 years old, CEO of Carter Dynamics, the world's leading artificial intelligence company. A black woman in a navy blue tailored suit, the stitches hugging her tall, composed figure, her posture carved from discipline itself. Her hair neatly styled and swept up framed a face of calm strength. She didn't smile, nor did she try to appear friendly. In her deep eyes was a kind of light. Only those who had weathered storms would understand the light of someone forged in fire and prejudice. She placed her grey Hermes Kelly bag into the overhead bin and slowly sat down in seat 1A, the very first seat with a full view ahead. To others it was a privilege. To her it was the symbol of a battle that had lasted half her life. Outside, the flight attendants moved briskly, adjusting seats and arranging glasses of wine. In their glances, Naomi was simply a different kind of passenger, among a sea of white suits and blue shirts. A silver-haired man in seat 1C gave her a brief look, short but heavy enough to express what society had long learned to leave unsaid. Perhaps she was sitting in the wrong place. But Naomi paid no attention. She opened her iPad and scrolled through the merger contract between Carter Dynamics and a Swiss data corporation, a deal worth $4.2 billion. If successful, it would not only open a new era for data security technology, but also mark the first time in history that a black woman would become the chair of a transcontinental tech conglomerate. She remembered her early years, when an investor once told her flat out that technology is a man's game. She remembered being mistaken for a secretary standing in conference rooms full of men who asked, "Are you sure you understand AI?" Every one of those moments, every small cut, had become polished armor. The first-class attendant approached Brooke Larson, 35, blonde hair, tied low red lips, and a smile sharp as a blade. "Good evening, ma'am," she said sweetly, though her eyes were cold. Naomi caught it immediately. The familiar look of someone who believed power came in only one color. "Good evening. I'm Naomi Carter. I pre-ordered a special meal lobster bisque and prime steak." Naomi replied in a calm, deep voice, a command wrapped in courtesy. Brooke nodded, her smile never touching her eyes. "Of course, ma'am. We'll serve you once the aircraft is stable." Then she turned away, her expression softening, only when she looked toward a man who had just boarded, Thomas Radcliffe, CEO of a venture capital fund. Naomi's lips curved faintly. She knew this silent game well, the way people sorted others by who mattered and who didn't. The intercom came to life. The cabin doors closed, and a smooth stillness filled the air. Naomi poured herself a glass of water and gazed at the fading city lights. She didn't know that right here, among those who believed themselves at the top of the world, she was about to force an entire system to confront its reflection. As the plane began to taxi, Naomi closed her eyes. Inside, she listened to her heartbeat, not the rhythm of anxiety, but of anticipation. Because she knew that no matter how high above the clouds you go, prejudice never disappears. It just wears a uniform and smiles. Behind her, Radcliffe chuckled, while mentioning the African-based platform of a company he didn't trust. Naomi heard it, but didn't react. She only tightened her hand slightly, remembering her father's words. You don't have to shout for them to hear you. Just do what's right, and your silence will echo louder than their noise. The first-class lights dimmed. Another attendant walked by, bowing slightly to 3 passengers behind her, asking if they'd like more champagne. Naomi was the only one not asked. She opened her eyes, staring into the space ahead. A thin mist clouded her gaze, not of sadness, but of a familiar premonition. Every time the world tested her, she proved it had chosen the wrong opponent. Every time someone tried to diminish her, they only raised her higher. And today, on Flight 731, it was about to happen again. The engines roared, the plane lifted from the ground, and the city lights below shrank into trembling lines of gold. Naomi rested her hand on the table, where a streak of golden light glimmered across her empty glass, and in that moment she whispered to herself like a quiet prophecy. If they think they can look down on me, they're about to learn who I am. 1 meal, 1 first-class cabin, 1 woman once mistaken for a secretary. But this time her silence would no longer be tolerance, it would be judgment. And as the plane rose into the sky, no one on board could have imagined that just a few hours later an email sent from Seat 1A would shake the entire aviation industry. Excuse me, Mom, but your premium meal is no longer available. The words fell into the first-class cabin like a single drop of water, yet to Naomi Carter they struck like thunder across a clear sky. Brooke Larson stood before Seat 1, holding a tray with no lid, only a cold sandwich and a glass of water beside a crumpled white napkin. She smiled the kind of smile from someone who felt blameless, because she never believed she had done anything wrong. Naomi stared at the tray, her eyes steady, though her chest tightened. Behind her, the soft laughter of 3 men echoed glasses clinking in casual privilege. To them it was familiarity, a quiet entitlement that never needed explanation. To her it was exclusion inside the very world she had fought to enter. She drew a slow breath. I pre-ordered lobster bisque and prime steak. I have both an email confirmation and a reminder from Aurora Air. Her voice wasn't raised yet. Every word cut through the perfumed air like a fine blade. Brooke shrugged. Maybe the system didn't update. It happens all the time. The line was delivered sweetly, ending with a faint, dismissive smile. She turned away without another glance. Naomi didn't stop her. She sat still, watching Brooke walk down the aisle, her back straight her steps, confident, as if she had just completed something small and routine. But for Naomi, this was not small. This was an old lesson repeating itself in a new disguise, the same prejudice, no longer crude, now wrapped in velvet civility, and the golden light of first class. The cold sandwich on the tray reflected Naomi's shadow in the polished table surface. In that moment, she didn't see a meal. She saw the system that had nurtured this silence, the shrugs that said, it's just a mix-up, the smiles that said, don't make a scene. She leaned back slightly, her hand folding calmly on her lap. She didn't need to eat. She needed to remember exactly how this felt, so that no one else would ever have to sit in Seat 1A with a cold sandwich, because of a system error. Behind her, Thomas Radcliffe raised his champagne glass, his voice cutting through the air, smug and loud. Maybe Aurora should keep a few extra premium meals for shareholders. I didn't know just anyone could book first class these days. Laughter followed. Naomi heard every word. She remembered the first time she stood in Sterling Capital's boardroom when an older executive handed her a coffee cup and said, "Thank you, sweetheart." She had simply smiled, set the cup on the table and replied, Once you finish that coffee, I'll begin presenting the $15 million proposal." The room had gone silent then, and today, high above the clouds, she knew that same silence was coming again, but this time it would be the silence of collapse. She looked across the aisle. A male attendant, Ethan Mills, younger, more reserved, was pouring wine for the passenger in seat 1C. He glanced briefly toward her, then quickly looked away, as if the glance itself were dangerous. She understood. He saw. He knew. But like so many before him, he chose silence to preserve his place. Naomi turned her gaze to the window. The sky outside had deepened into a dense, quiet blue, the same color as her anger. Not loud, not violent, but spreading steadily like a tide. In her mind, her father's voice returned. "Don't let anyone decide if you're worthy. Let them realize it themselves when you no longer need to say a word." She opened her iPad, logging into the Carter Dynamics internal system. Her fingers moved deliberately, as if checking emails, but each tap was laying the groundwork for an earthquake. A few quick commands, data extraction, flight logs, crew roster, employee ID. Then a name appeared on the screen: Brooke Ann Larson, ID AA7421, Senior Cabin Crew. Beside it, a partner company note, 2 negative service reports. No action taken. Repeated unprofessional language toward passengers. Naomi tilted her head slightly, a faint smile crossing her lips. Not one of satisfaction, but of certainty. She had been right. Across the cabin, Brooke chatted with Radcliffe, her laughter bright, her tone sweet as honey. As she leaned closer, Naomi caught the reflection in her own water glass, the fake smile, the arrogant glint in the eyes, the confidence of someone who believed she was untouchable within a shielded system. Keep smiling, Naomi thought, because when this plane lands, that smile will be erased from every flight in Aurora's history. A middle-aged white passenger in row 2 turned to glance at her, his eyes curious and faintly irritated. Naomi met his gaze with a calm, silent stare, the kind of look that made people turn away first. She set the sandwich aside, picked up a pen, and wrote softly on the edge of a notepad. "A system is only strong when it is fair." She paused, looking at the words, as if signing the first order of a war. Outside, the aircraft trembled slightly as the crew prepared for dinner service. Inside, Naomi Carter was preparing for a quiet reckoning. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to call for a manager. She didn't need to say another word. All she needed was patience, because in just a few minutes from seat 1, a signal would be sent, and the system that had protected every Brooke Larson would begin to pay its price. Naomi placed her hand on the screen, the blue light washing over her face. A coded message appeared, typed with precision. "Activate emergency audit protocol. Flight 731, cabin crew ID A 7421, confirm within 10 minutes. She pressed send. The screen went dark. Silence. Only the steady hum of the engines remained, the heartbeat of a giant system just awakened. And in the midst of it all, a black woman with a cold sandwich was rewriting the meaning of justice above the clouds. The first-class cabin glowed under soft golden light. Silver trays shimmered, glasses clinked quietly, and everything continued as if the injustice that had unfolded in seat 1A had never existed. Naomi Carter sat motionless. The cold sandwich remained in front of her, perfectly placed, like evidence of discrimination, wrapped in the disguise of professionalism. She didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't look at anyone. Only her hand moved slightly, tightening, then loosening again. Silence. But it wasn't weakness. It was a storm compressing itself before the thunder strikes. She had lived through this too many times, the judgmental stares in boardrooms, the fake smiles on trading floors, the cold handshakes from men who couldn't believe a black woman could sign billion-dollar contracts. Each time she had chosen silence, not out of fear, but because she understood that words in those moments only fed the arrogance of prejudice. From behind her came laughter. Radcliffe was boasting about his investments in Shanghai, his voice booming as if the cabin were his private stage. The Asians are always polite, but I doubt they understand technology the way we do. Another round of laughter followed. Naomi didn't turn around, but each word carved itself into her memory like a needle of ice. Ethan, the young attendant, the only one in the crew who still had a trace of conscience, walked past. He glanced toward her for an instant, then lowered his head, quickly avoiding her eyes. That fear said everything. Everyone saw, but no one dared to speak. She didn't blame him, because at 26, she too had once bowed her head in silence in a meeting where someone called her the diversity decoration of the leadership team. She had stayed quiet then, and 1 year later, she bought the entire company. She remembered that day vividly, the day she signed the acquisition papers, while the same men who had mocked her sat below watching as she stood at the podium and said, in her short speech, "Thank you for underestimating me. Because of that, I learned how to win without making noise." Naomi closed her eyes gently, her breathing slow, steady, controlled. The silence in the cabin began to take on its own power, a quiet form of resistance that made those who had once dismissed her start to feel uneasy. Brooke returned to check on the passengers behind, deliberately avoiding Naomi's gaze. But as she passed, their eyes met. Just half a second. Yet in that glance, Naomi saw it clearly, not remorse but arrogance, the smug smile of someone who believed that power would always protect her. "Everything all right, ma'am?" Brooke's voice came soft, as if nothing had happened. Naomi answered evenly, her tone cold. "Perfectly fine. Thank you for your concern." Brooke smiled a practiced service smile, polished by thousands of flights, but in that moment it felt more like a slap than an apology. As she walked away, Naomi turned toward the window. Moonlight slid across the wing and reflected in her eyes, deep, steady, and glowing like embers. In her mind, fragments of memory intertwined. The first day she arrived at Harvard, the tiny dorm room with its old wooden desk, the nights spent working until dawn, drinking cheap coffee, writing the first lines of the data security project that would later become the foundation of Carter Dynamics. The sweat, the rejections, the skeptical glances all had led her here to seat 1A, and it was here that the world once again reminded her it still wasn't ready to accept people like her. She wasn't angry. She was just tired. Tired of having to prove she was worthy. Tired of prejudice hidden behind polite smiles. Tired of staying gracious in the face of disdain. A woman who had climbed through every layer of pressure now just wanted peace. But justice wouldn't let her rest. She lifted her smartwatch, its blue screen glowing softly against her brown skin. A message from Maya appeared, audit protocol activated. Data being collected, awaiting confirmation from Aurora's CEO. Naomi gave a small nod. No need to reply. Only patience. Outside, the plane shuddered slightly. A wave of turbulence rolled through, making the silver tray tilt. The sandwich slid a little, just a small movement. But Naomi watched it for a long time. The only thing she'd been served today was the perfect symbol of how the world treated her, cold, tasteless, and assuming she would quietly swallow it. No, she thought. Not this time. She folded the tray, wiped her hands with the napkin, and placed it over the sandwich as if closing an old chapter. Inside, her anger had turned into something sharper clarity, the calm power of someone ready to change the rules without asking permission. The cabin lights shifted to blue. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "We're flying over Canadian airspace. Estimated arrival in Zurich in 8 hours. 8 hours. 8 hours for Naomi Carter to rewrite the history of an airline and redefine what the world calls class." She reopened her iPad not to read contracts, but to look again at the meal confirmation email. Every word, every line was a reminder of their lie, and that lie would soon be exposed. A strange feeling rose within her, not hatred, but responsibility. She knew that if she didn't act, hundreds, maybe thousands of women would keep enduring what she had on planes, in offices, in boardrooms, in every place where power claimed the right to decide human worth. Naomi exhaled slowly, her eyes leaving the screen. Beyond the thin silver clouds, the sky stretched wide and endless. In that silence, she whispered to herself, a vow sent into the air. If they want me to disappear in silence, then I'll make this silence the reason they fall. And as the stars began to shimmer outside the window, a woman, exhausted by prejudice, rose once more within her own stillness, ready for the retaliation the entire world would soon hear. There was no explosion, no noise, no spectacle. Yet inside the first-class cabin of Aurora Air Flight 731, a battle had already begun. Naomi Carter sat upright, her hands gently folded on her lap. Her face was calm, unnervingly so. But behind that stillness, every cell in her body was wound tight like a string about to snap. She knew that in this moment, if she handled it wrong, it would be dismissed as a mere service issue. But if she handled it right, it would become the breaking point of an entire system. A faint blue light from her smartwatch glowed across her face. A signal had been sent, emergency audit protocol. That single tap might have looked simple, but it was the switch that set hundreds of servers across 2 continents in motion. Far below, on the 41st floor of Carter Dynamics Tower, Maya Lewis, the chief of staff and Naomi's right hand, was still awake. When the urgent notification flashed across her screen, she didn't need to ask why. Just seeing the line of code, Flight 731, cabin crew ID AA7421, was enough. They just touched our CEO. She adjusted her glasses, tied her hair up, and began to type. The rhythm of queries, encryption, and data synchronization played like a symphony. She accessed the Aurora Air API, a special channel Carter Dynamics had gained as their cybersecurity provider. In less than 90 seconds, Brooke Ann Larson's profile appeared. Date joined 2018. Position senior cabin crew. 2 prior complaints for discriminatory behavior. 1 internal email. Focus on high-tipping passengers, they drive revenue. Maya smirked. Got you. She expanded the search pattern recognition mode. Hundreds of service logs over 3 years filled the screen. Seemingly minor traces, response times, passenger demographics, priority frequencies. The company's bias detection algorithm, developed by Naomi and Maya themselves, processed the data. 1 figure appeared. Bias Interaction Index 87.4%. Warning, repeated biased behavior. Potential cultural integrity risk. Maya didn't look up. She whispered softly, as if sending her words through the clouds to where Naomi was sitting. Signal received. We begin. On the plane, Naomi remained silent. Her eyes stayed on the window, watching the misty white clouds drift past. Inside her chest, each heartbeat became a countdown to change. A soft chime sounded from her watch. Message delivered. Maya had confirmed. The protocol was running. The data was now heading toward Aurora Air's CEO, Richard Hale, and the company's senior legal team. Naomi leaned back in her seat. not to rest, but to watch as the world began to shift. She remembered another time at a global summit in Berlin when an investor had asked her, "Do you really believe a black woman can run a multi-billion-dollar tech empire?" She had smiled and answered simply, "I don't believe. I know." And now, high above the clouds, that answer was repeating itself not through words, but through action. While Naomi waited in silence in New York, Maya completed the report. A 32-page encrypted file charts, logs, internal emails, behavioral history. At the bottom, she typed the note, "Subject Systemic Discrimination, Flight 731. Request immediate cultural audit." Sent on behalf of CEO Carter Dynamics. When she pressed send, Maya didn't feel triumph, only a chill running down her spine. She knew what she had unleashed would not stop with one airline. It would spread like a chain of falling dominoes, toppling every place that believed power was a license to demean. Outside, the sky deepened to indigo. Naomi opened her iPad, pretending to read a report, but she was really tracking the system's response time. 10 minutes, 15, 20. Then the notification appeared. Status confirmed. Investigation order approved. HR and legal team in Zurich on standby. Naomi closed her eyes. The battle had begun. She inhaled deeply. In the quiet air, she could hear her own heartbeat, steady, strong, unwavering. A faint smile crossed her lips, not of joy, but of certainty. She had chosen the perfect moment. Behind her, Brooke was still working her smile radiant as she poured another glass of wine for Radcliffe. Her fingers brushed his glass, just enough contact to charm. Every gesture, every word was now captured by the cabin's surveillance system. And in the data flowing toward Zurich, each look, each tone, each smirk had already become evidence. Ethan passed by, hesitating near Naomi's row. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but Naomi gave a slight shake of her head. That tiny motion said everything. "No need. It's handled." He nodded quickly, walking away faster, glancing back with a mix of admiration and fear. An hour later, Naomi received a message from Maya, investigation active. Flight 731 flagged under red line. HR and legal will intercept crew upon arrival. Zurich team notified. Naomi set the iPad down and turned to the window. Against the pitch-black sky, thousands of tiny stars shimmered a peaceful sight. But inside her, an empire was beginning to tremble. This was no longer about a meal or even a personal insult. This was a quiet reckoning in the sky, where one woman was using intellect and composure to remind the world that true power never needs to shout. She opened her leather notebook and wrote with a fountain pen, "Justice doesn't need noise. It only needs to be triggered at the right time." The cabin lights dimmed. The engine's hum pulsed steadily, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Only Naomi remained awake, sharp, unflinching. Her father's words echoed once more in her mind. "When they look down on you, don't answer with anger. Let their own system judge them." She looked ahead toward the thin curtain dividing first class from the cockpit. The light from inside the flight deck spilled through softly glowing blue, like the line between past and future. Naomi knew that once this plane landed, nothing would ever be the same. No shouting. No threats. Just one press of send. One message. One cold sandwich. One woman who had stayed silent for too long. And with that alone, the world was about to relearn the meaning of respect. More than 7,000 kilometers away from Naomi, the city of New York was still awake. The lights of the Carter Dynamics Tower blazed like a beacon amid the steel and glass forest of Manhattan. On the 41st floor inside a wind-sealed room so silent it felt alive, Maya Lewis sat upright, her fingers flying across the keyboard at a pace that sounded like the tempo of an emergency symphony. The screen before her was filled with lines of code and streams of data glowing blue like the veins of a colossal organism coming to life. Naomi's emergency order, the Emergency Audit Protocol, had fully activated the Carter Dynamics security grid. In less than 2 minutes, Maya had breached the internal API of Aurora Air, where the airline stored VIP client data crew manifests and service logs. She didn't ask for reasons. She didn't need to. She knew that when Naomi Carter gave a command, it meant the world was about to change. Her curly hair was tied back tightly, the screen's light washing across her face, reflecting in eyes that carried the precision of someone who had long fought her battles through data. Maya, 30 years old, had been a lead behavioral engineer at MIT before Naomi recruited her as an executive advisor. They weren't just boss and assistant. They were two halves of the same design intellect and instinct. "All right, Brooke Larson," she murmured. "Let's see what you've been hiding." The system's speed startled even her. One by one, records began to appear. Flight logs, customer feedback, internal reports, crew emails. She filtered for service delay and meal priority. Results: 14 cases where Black or Asian passengers experienced delayed service, 6 where pre-ordered meals were denied. She widened the search. A chat log between flight crew members from the previous year appeared on screen. "First-class passengers are all show-offs. I just serve whoever's more pleasant. Black passengers always complain. Avoid them and you'll have a peaceful shift." Maya froze. The coldness in her eyes melted into something sharper anger, the deep, controlled kind. She launched the bias pattern recognition tool, a proprietary Carter Dynamics AI that analyzed speech-tone expressions and response speed to identify discrimination patterns. The result appeared like a digital indictment: Bias Interaction Index, 87.4%. Warning: high-risk cultural bias detected. Immediate audit recommended. She didn't need more proof. The evidence was overwhelming. With one hand holding a cup of cold coffee, the other typing rapidly, she added the final note. Subject systemic discrimination. Flight 731. Report initiated under emergency protocol. Data cross verified via Carter Dynamics AI module. Within seconds, the file was compressed, encrypted with Naomi's digital key, and transmitted to Aurora Air's CEO, Richard Hale, along with 3 senior executives from legal and human resources. The words "encrypted report delivered" pulsed faintly across the screen. Maya leaned back and drew a long breath. No cheers, no victory music, only the quiet hum of justice moving forward. Just then, a chat window blinked open. A message from Aurora's internal network appeared. Investigation request acknowledged. HR and Legal Zurich standing by. Protocol Red Line 731 initiated. Maya smiled faintly. She knew the term red line wasn't standard procedure. It was the highest level of emergency classification reserved for incidents that could threaten global reputation or breach corporate ethics, which meant that when Naomi's plane landed, the entire flight crew would be detained for immediate investigation. She sent a short message to Naomi Donne. Red Line 731 active. Zurich will handle upon landing. Maya reclined, slightly closing her eyes for a moment. Naomi's face appeared in her mind, the same composed woman who had once told her during their first interview, "I'm not hiring you for your coding skills. I'm hiring you because you know the difference between data and truth." And now truth was speaking not in words, but through numbers that could not be denied. She reopened the analytics window, activating the timeline map. A curve filled the screen, every dot representing a deviation, a trace of bias, a crack in the polished shell of luxury aviation. She looked at it not just as an expert, but as someone who had lived through it. She remembered her days at another global firm when someone had called her the lucky brown girl, hired for diversity. Back then she'd stayed silent, but tonight she was speaking for thousands who couldn't. Outside her window, New York gleamed endlessly, but in this small office, the only light came from the glow of her screen. She knew that across the ocean, Naomi was sitting in first class with that same calm face, and because of that, Maya felt peace. She typed one final line into the Carter Dynamics internal log, Initiator N. Carter. Action Ethical Review triggered. Consequence, Systemic Audit pending. Note, justice has been set in motion. When the clock struck 2:03 in the morning, Maya stood up. She poured herself more coffee, glanced out the window and saw the Hudson River glimmering under the city lights. The city was still awake, just like her, and like Naomi, half a world away. Neither woman shouted. Neither needed an audience. There were just two women, one in the sky, one in the steel jungle, igniting a revolution in silence. And when the confirmation email from CEO Richard Hale arrived carrying only 3 words, received, initiating immediately. Maya whispered softly, her voice drifting like wind past the glass. All right, Brooke Larson. Let's see who's really out of service when that plane lands. In New York, a young woman had turned night into a battlefield. In the sky, another was turning silence into a declaration. And as the two minds connected, through an invisible thread of code, the old structures of power began to crack, starting right there in first class. The first-class cabin was bathed in the pale blue glow of the night sky. The steady hum of the engines echoed like the heartbeat of a giant machine. Everything appeared calm, peaceful, except for the woman in seat 1A, who with only a few taps had already set an entire airline corporation trembling. Naomi Carter opened her eyes. The message from Maya had arrived. Red line 731 activated. HR and Legal Zurich on standby. She read it again, a faint smile touching her lips. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. On that calm face, no one could see the storm quietly building within her. She lifted her gaze and looked around the cabin. Everything continued as normal. Champagne poured, laughter drifted, music played softly. The world seemed still, yet only she knew this was the moment the system began to dismantle itself. Brooke Larson was still moving gracefully through the aisles, her smile flawless, her every gesture rehearsed to perfection. Each step she took sounded to Naomi like a ticking clock counting down. Naomi felt no need to be angry. At this point, even a single word would serve as evidence. She pressed the service button. The quiet ting echoed sharply, delicate but cutting. Within seconds, Ethan Mills, the young flight attendant, approached and bowed slightly. "Yes, Mrs. Carter, how can I assist you?" His voice trembled just enough to betray that he knew something was coming. Naomi looked directly at him, her eyes cold, yet composed. Could you tell me she began slowly under Aurora Air's internal policy when a first-class passenger pre-orders a meal, but is told it's unavailable? On what basis is service priority determined? Ethan froze. The question sounded polite, but he immediately recognized it for what it was, a linguistic trap. One wrong word and his answer could become evidence in an ongoing investigation. Well, usually, he stammered, we prioritize based on booking time and passenger frequency. Naomi tilted her head slightly. I'm a Diamond Elite member. I placed my order 7 days ago. I have an email confirmation. Yet the passenger seated behind me, who booked, later received their full meal. Do you have any other explanation? Ethan stiffened. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. It could have been a system error, ma'am. Or perhaps a temporary crew decision. Naomi smiled faintly, a small, controlled smile that made him swallow his next breath. Temporary. So someone on board has the right to decide the value of a first-class customer. She paused, her tone dropping to something soft but razor-sharp. And if that person keeps making the same kind of decisions, would you still call that temporary? Ethan couldn't answer. He lowered his head and stepped back. Naomi's voice came quietly enough for only him to hear. No need to apologize. Just know that every word you've said is being recorded. He nodded quickly, then almost fled. Naomi watched him go, her expression free of anger, only the calm precision of someone holding a scalpel, knowing exactly where to cut. 15 minutes later, her watch vibrated softly. A new message appeared. Recording activated. All cabin footage uploaded to Zurich server. Confirmation. CEO Hale approved. She leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. In her mind, streams of data flowed like invisible music, cabin video service time analytics, Brooke's tone pattern, when she said out of stock. All of it was being logged by the very technology Carter Dynamics had supplied to Aurora Air. A perfect irony the system built to protect the airline's reputation was now the instrument exposing its flaws. Behind her, Brooke's cheerful voice rang out. More champagne, Mr. Radcliffe. Of course, Brooke. You always know my favorite. Their laughter mingled light and casual. Naomi opened her iPad and reviewed the crew data that Maya had just transmitted. Next to each name was a record of passenger complaints. Brooke, 2 discrimination claims. Ethan, 1 non-response complaint. Several others tagged as bias behavior under review. Naomi selected them all, attached a note, and typed the final command, request full behavior audit, Flight 731. Escalate to Executive Ethics Board. She pressed send. 1 touch, 1 judgment. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere remained luxurious, a hollow kind of luxury. Naomi glanced toward the cockpit door, where a small red light blinked the indicator for recording mode. A part of her almost laughed. They still believed she was just another quiet, arrogant passenger. They didn't realize that every fake smile was now evidence against them. She turned toward the window. The night sky stretched endlessly, the moon casting silver light across her face. Her eyes gleamed not with anger or sorrow, but with the quiet clarity of someone certain she was doing what was right. She whispered softly as if to herself, "This isn't revenge. It's correction. One time for all time." At that very moment, at Aurora Air headquarters in Chicago, CEO Richard Hale received the Red Line 731 report. The subject line flashed in red across the screen. Systemic discrimination. Detected urgent ethics response. Required. He looked to his legal team. Who sent it? Carter Dynamics, sir. Report initiated by Naomi Carter. The room fell silent. Everyone knew that name. Richard Hale nodded, his tone firm and low. Activate the protocol immediately. I want the Zurich HR team on site before that plane lands. Meanwhile, high above the clouds, Naomi rested her head against the seat and closed her eyes. The plane flew on its cabin, glowing warm with laughter and wine, the illusion of peace intact. But Naomi knew. With every passing minute, another layer of the world's polished surface was peeling away. One press of send. One report. One woman denied a meal. That was all it took to make an empire bow. Because in a world that believed itself untouchable, sometimes all it takes is one woman who chooses silence no longer. The wheels screeched long against the runway. The pale morning light of Zurich spilled into the first-class cabin, soft and cold. Aurora Air Flight 731 slowed, shuddered slightly, and came to a full stop on the mist-covered tarmac. Passengers exhaled in relief. Seatbelts clicked open in unison. The flight had ended, or at least that's what they thought. For Naomi Carter, it was only beginning. She opened her eyes, her pupils reflecting the silvery glow outside the window. Her smartwatch vibrated gently. Red line confirmed. Zurich HR and legal on site. Naomi exhaled slowly. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. There was only one feeling within her, the calm certainty of justice about to take form. She didn't stand yet. She waited. She listened to the sound of rolling wheels along the taxiway, the thud of luggage being lifted, the sharp clicks of Brooke Larson's heels behind her. Each sound was like a countdown in a symphony of collapse. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Zurich International Airport." The captain's steady voice echoed through the speakers, unaware that within minutes his entire crew would be suspended. Naomi straightened her collar, lifted her grey Hermes bag, and stood slowly. Her navy blue suit was still flawless, not a wrinkle in sight, just like her composure. As she opened the overhead compartment, the light from above cast her figure in contrast, graceful and commanding at once. At the cabin door ahead, two people were waiting. A tall man with salt and pepper hair, Mark Ellison, Aurora Airs, European Regional Director. Beside him stood Sophia Reinhardt, the company's global legal counsel, holding a red file stamped urgent. Both bowed slightly, speaking almost in unison. "Welcome to Zurich, Ms. Carter. We sincerely apologize," for Naomi raised her hand, cutting them off her voice, calm and low. "No apology needed. This is only the beginning." She didn't stop, didn't look back. Her footsteps landed softly on the carpet, each one echoing like the closing drumbeat of an era. Behind her, Mark Ellison and Sophia straightened. Their expressions shifted. They had read the Red Line 731 report. They knew what was waiting beyond that door. And they understood this was no longer a service incident. It was the most severe ethical investigation in Aurora Air's history. At the rear of the cabin, the crew began cleaning up. Brooke Larson was still smiling as she always did after every flight. She was already thinking about the martini waiting at her hotel, the party with friends, the story she would tell about a difficult passenger in seat 1A. She had no idea that the moment she stepped off this plane, her life would turn in a direction she could never return from. The rear cabin door opened. A group of 3 people in black suits stood waiting, each wearing red badges that read HR Emergency Investigation Unit. The white light from the jet bridge spilled in, washing their faces pale and expressionless. The woman in front, Karen Dufresne, Global Head of Service Culture, spoke clearly, her tone sharp as glass. "Crew of Flight 731, please follow us to Emergency Meeting Room 2. This is a mandatory procedure under Article 6.3 of the International Ethics Service Code." No one spoke. Brooke frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, what's going on? Is there a problem?" Karen didn't answer. She just met Brooke's eyes. "Please come with us." No one smiled anymore. No one dared ask. A chill swept through the group as every attendant felt the same thing, the creeping weight of dread. They were escorted down a long white corridor, walls gleaming with their reflections. The air was heavy as metal. Their footsteps echoed hollow and rhythmic, the sound of downfall approaching. Inside Emergency Meeting Room, 2 chairs were lined in a row. On the table sat folders marked with each crew member's name. Beside every file was a small black recording device. Karen took her seat at the head of the table, her voice steady, restrained, yet razor-sharp. This interview will be recorded and archived as evidence for an internal review. You have the right to remain silent, but any statement made may be used in disciplinary proceedings. Brooke tried to steady her voice. I don't understand. This is just a passenger who wasn't satisfied, that's all. Karen opened the folder, turning to the middle page. A still image from the cabin camera stared back. Brooke standing before Seat 1A, holding a tray with a cold sandwich, her mouth mid-sentence. Maybe the system didn't update. It happens all the time. Karen looked up, expressionless. Do you recognize this behavior? Brooke swallowed hard. I was just following procedure. It was just a small issue. Karen interrupted, reading aloud. The system confirms the passenger pre-ordered her meal 7 days in advance, Diamond Elite status. 3 passengers seated behind her were served their full premium meals. Do you have any reasonable explanation? Silence. Brooke turned her head, searching the faces of her colleagues. None dared look back. Karen lowered her voice, but her words struck like a hammer. Red Line 731 has been activated. That means this is no longer an incident. This is a systemic ethics investigation. Brooke's breathing quickened. For the first time, she was afraid not of losing her job, but of how easily the world's glossy surface could shatter with a single sentence. I understand now. At that same moment, Naomi exited the airport, seated in the back of a black limousine belonging to the Swiss delegation. She glanced at her smartwatch. The final message from Maya appeared: interviews underway. Brooke Larson, suspended pending investigation. Naomi placed the watch down and leaned against the seat. Outside the window, Zurich glowed softly through the morning mist. She felt no joy, no satisfaction, only deep, unwavering calm. She remembered her father's words. Justice is not revenge. It is when people are forced to see their own wrongs. She whispered quietly, almost to herself, They've seen it now, Father. The light outside grew brighter. Behind her, in that sterile white room, those who once believed they had followed procedure were finally facing what true procedure looked like. Ahead of her, the woman once denied a meal was walking toward a future where respect no longer had a color. Flight 731 had landed. But the awakening of an entire industry had just begun. At Aurora Air's headquarters in Chicago, dawn had not yet risen. But on the 52nd floor, where the Global Executive Boardroom was located, the lights blazed as if it were midday. White light from the LED screens reflected off the tense faces of more than 10 people. No one made small talk. Not a single cup of coffee was poured. In the center of the room, Richard Hale, 56 years old CEO of Aurora Air, sat upright, his eyes fixed on a thick red file over 20 pages long. The title on the cover read, in bold, Internal Audit Report, Flight 731, Red Line Protocol. The atmosphere was heavy. The man who had weathered multi-billion-dollar mergers and survived global media crises now felt a chill down his spine as he read the first line, Complainant Naomi Carter, CEO Carter Dynamics. That name, in international business circles, meant influence intellect and integrity qualities that could not be bought. And now she was the one filing a case against them, not through the press or social media, but through the very data system the airline had once been proud of. On his left, Linda Shaw, Global Head of Human Resources, flipped through the pages. Still images from cabin cameras, service time graphs, and the voice analysis report of flight attendant Brooke Larson. On the main screen played the exchange everyone now knew by heart. I'm sorry, ma'am, your meal is out of stock. I pre-ordered and received confirmation. The system must not have updated. It happens all the time. Just 3 sentences, but enough to shatter 40 years of Aurora's carefully crafted perfection. Linda looked up, her voice strained. "We can't bury this. Naomi Carter is not someone who will stay silent." Richard nodded. He paused for a few seconds, then spoke each word deliberate. "We won't bury it. We can't. And we shouldn't." The room fell silent. His eyes swept across the table, sharp as steel. "I want everyone here to understand. This isn't about a denied meal. This is about a moral fracture within the very culture we claim to be proud of. And if we don't repair it, history will." His hand struck the table lightly, the sound cold and final. On the screen, through a secure connection, appeared Maya Lewis from the Carter Dynamics office in New York. Behind her, the company's silver logo gleamed against a dark backdrop like a movie scene. Maya spoke her tone, calm, but piercing, each word cutting through the static. "Carter Dynamics is not asking for compensation. We don't want an apology. We want action." She projected a chart on the screen, behavioral bias analytics, generated by their AI system. 42 seconds average response time for white passengers, 6 minutes, and 11 seconds response time for Naomi Carter. 0% system error, 100% human error. The room was still. Richard inhaled deeply, then said, "Thank you, Maya. You and CEO Carter just helped us see the problem we've been pretending not to see." Meanwhile, in Zurich, the investigation team continued interviewing the crew. Hourly updates streamed into Chicago, matching the data Maya had submitted. Every word Brooke spoke, every shrug appeared on record like knife marks on Aurora's reputation. Linda looked at Richard, her voice trembling. "If this goes public, our stock could drop at least 12%. The press will tear us apart," Richard replied, without hesitation. "We can lose stock, but if we lose dignity, Aurora loses everything." Another executive known for his caution spoke up. "So what's our move? Suspending the crew won't be enough." Richard paused for a long moment, then spoke with the calm weight of a verdict. "We're going to do what no airline has ever dared to do." He turned to Linda. "Suspend the entire Flight 731 crew immediately, without waiting for final results. Expand the investigation to every flight that included Brooke Larson in the past 2 years. Publish the findings publicly, all eyes fixed on him. And more importantly, I want a formal invitation sent to Naomi Carter. Not for an apology, but to appoint her as Aurora Air's Global Diversity and Culture Advisor." A regional director gaped. "You mean she'll rewrite our entire training policies?" Richard looked directly at him. "Not rewrite, redefine." A long silence followed. Then Linda put down her pen and nodded first. Like a row of falling dominoes, one by one, the others nodded too. Not because they were ordered to, but because they understood it was the only way forward in a world that was finally waking up. Richard signed the document in front of him, his pen gliding across the page. Directive 731. Immediate suspension and policy reform, issued by CEO Richard Hale, Aurora Air, 9:43 a.m. Chicago time, when the ink dried. A new chapter for Aurora Air officially began. The meeting ended in silence, not the silence of fear, but of awakening. Everyone left the room, except Richard Hale. He remained seated, looking out the glass wall, as the first rays of sunlight spread across the city, bathing it in gold. He sighed, but it was the sigh of a man who had just found his company's moral compass again. His phone lit up with an email from Naomi Carter. "I appreciate your response. But remember, reform doesn't begin with policy. It begins with how you treat people." NC Richard read it and smiled faintly. He nodded to himself. "And this time the world will see." In Zurich, Naomi sat in her hotel suite, listening to Maya's update over the phone. She said nothing. She simply set down her teacup and gazed out at the mist-covered lake. Her voice came softly, almost like a breath. No need for victory, only for change. Outside sunlight touched the surface of the water, casting a long, shimmering reflection. In that quiet moment, Naomi Carter understood that with a single act, she had made an empire bow before the truth. The news exploded overnight. Headlines flooded international front pages. Black CEO denied her meal, exposes systemic bias at Aurora Air, a cold sandwich and the shock that shook global aviation. Naomi Carter, when silence became the world's strongest weapon. From Chicago to London, from New York to Tokyo, the hashtag Seat1A spread across every social platform. Thousands of people, business leaders, flight attendants, travelers and workers, shared their own stories of being ignored, dismissed or discriminated against in the very spaces they had paid a high price to enter. A Kenyan lawyer wrote, "I've never sat in seat 1A, but I know what it feels like to be told, we've run out of meals for you." What they didn't realize was that what had truly run out was respect. An Indian engineer posted a photo of an airline meal from another carrier with the caption, "For the first time they called me by my name instead of Sir in seat 4C. Thank you, Naomi Carter, for forcing an entire industry to change. The hashtag Seat1A became a movement, then a manifesto. No one was talking about ticket prices or luxury anymore. People were talking about dignity. At Aurora Air's New York office, the PR team read out the latest report. In just 24 hours, 9,200 emails demanding internal cultural reform. 37% from frequent flyers. Investors in London are requesting a global diversity and equity forum. The US government has requested an official ethics report on luxury aviation services. The room fell silent. The head of communications whispered, "We can't run from this anymore." Across the ocean, The Guardian published a headline, in bold, "One denied meal, one global reckoning." Articles, videos, interviews flooded the media. But strangely, Naomi Carter appeared nowhere. No press statements, no interviews, no social posts. She remained silent. And that silence made the world listen louder than ever. In a small meeting room in Zurich, Naomi sat with 3 young women who had asked to meet her. One was a Filipina flight attendant who had been yelled at by a passenger because her skin was not light enough. Another, a hotel receptionist, demoted for not fitting the high-end client image. The third, a 24-year-old African woman, spoke with trembling hands. "We don't want fame. We just want to be treated like people." Naomi listened quietly. She didn't nod, didn't console, didn't offer grand speeches. She simply looked into their eyes and said slowly, "Sometimes change doesn't begin with shouting. It begins with one person who refuses to bow." Silence filled the room, a silence weighted not by fear, but by faith. At that same moment in Chicago, Richard Hale was preparing for the largest press conference in Aurora Air's history. He wore a grey suit without a tie, his face tired but resolute. When the camera flashes went off, he stood before the reporters and declared, "We acknowledge that within Aurora's system, subtle discrimination has existed disguised beneath professionalism. From this day forward, we are not just apologizing. We are changing. Every service process, training method, and evaluation system will be rewritten. And the person who will help us do that is Naomi Carter." The room buzzed. A reporter asked, "Aren't you concerned about shareholder backlash?" Richard answered without blinking, What concerns me more is that if we don't change, the next generation will grow up in a world where silence is still mistaken for politeness. That moment, his video spread like wildfire, over 3 million shares within 24 hours. The phrase "world without silence" became the official slogan of the Seat 1A movement. Within weeks, dozens of airlines, hotel chains, and luxury service corporations issued internal memos, review diversity policies, launch unconscious bias training, implement Seat 1, a protocol. Naomi never made a public appearance, but everyone knew she had started it all. A Forbes feature called her the woman who changed aviation with just one look. The Washington Post wrote, Naomi Carter didn't shout, didn't accuse. She let data speak, and justice followed. That evening in her hotel suite overlooking Lake Zurich, Naomi sat alone at her desk. Her phone kept lighting up hundreds of congratulatory messages, interview requests, media invitations, partnership offers. She scrolled past them all without opening a single one. Instead, she opened a blank document titled Seat 1A, The Silent Revolution. She typed the first line. No one is born to be told they don't belong. A seat may define where you sit, but it should never define your worth. She paused, gazing at the words, then smiled faintly. It was not the smile of triumph, but of someone who knew she had done what needed to be done. The lamplight reflected against the glass, blending her face with the night skyline. In the distance, the Zurich airport lights flickered planes taking off into the dawn, carrying with them new policies, new lessons, and the legacy of Seat 1A forever marked as a symbol of awakening. 3 months after the Flight 731 incident, the world was different. On a flight from Atlanta to Cape Town, Naomi Carter stepped into the first-class cabin of Aurora Air. This time there were no judging glances, no half-smiles, only a quiet respect. The seat before her, 1A, bore a small plaque, Reserved Seat of Change. We remember. She paused for a few seconds. In her eyes reflected that small sign, but in her heart she saw once again the image of that cold sandwich, the spark that had ignited a revolution. She sat down, fastened her seatbelt, and glanced around. A flight attendant approached her, smile. Genuine, her tone sincere. Mrs. Carter, today, we're serving lobster bisque, and if you would allow it, this is a gesture of gratitude from the entire crew. Naomi looked at the young woman and saw in her eyes not fear, but respect. She nodded softly. Thank you. But don't thank me. Thank those who were once forgotten. As the plane lifted through the clouds, Naomi gazed down at the quiet world below and thought about the journey that had led her here, from a first-class seat, a careless remark to thousands of people who found the courage to tell their own stories. Across international airports, the Seat 1A protocol had become a global standard. All employees received training in equitable service. Every flight now had behavioral monitoring, powered by AI to detect unconscious bias. And in every first-class cabin, there was a small plaque engraved with the words, "Respect has no class." One afternoon, in her Manhattan office at Carter Dynamics, Naomi wrote a letter by hand to a 16-year-old girl from Florida who had emailed her to say that her career counselor told her black women don't belong in tech. Naomi's handwriting was steady and graceful. People will make you believe you don't belong anywhere until the day you make them realize you created that place yourself. If anyone ever tells you that seat isn't for you, just smile and ask, then who was it designed for? And remember, you always have the right to sit in 1A. She signed the letter, folded it carefully, her eyes calm but warm. That evening, as the city lights came alive, Naomi stood by the window. Below her, the towers of Manhattan reflected 1,000 points of light, just as she had once reflected an entire system forced to change. She knew that true justice was never about punishment, but awakening. A denied sandwich might seem small, but in the right hands, it could become the spark that rewrites history. Naomi Carter never needed a microphone, never needed a stage. All she needed was an empty seat, and the world at last had learned to listen. From the perspective of a leadership ethics expert, Naomi Carter's journey is not just the story of a woman who dared to confront injustice, but a reminder to us all that in a world where power is often measured by volume, true strength lies in knowing when to stay silent and how to act with purpose. A seat may determine where someone is placed in a space, but it should never define their worth. Naomi did not shout, did not retaliate. She made an entire system reflect upon itself. And that is the mark of true leadership. If this story makes you believe that dignity has no class, hit like to spread that message. Subscribe to follow more journeys where justice is told through kindness, and comment below with the phrase that represents your belief: hold your dignity.